Hey, it's Ashley. Tonight's story starts in a place most of us only visit by accident, a dream. But not the soft kind, not the strange, forgettable kind, the kind that feels built, designed, maintained by something that knows exactly where your fear lives. And sometimes the scariest part isn't the nightmare you fall into. It's realizing someone has been building one inside you for years. This is how to build a better nightmare. The static was the first sign. Not the crackle of a bad radio signal, but the fine prickling sensation that skittered across my scalp, a precursor to the fall. It was like the air itself was being sanded down, worn smooth into something unnatural. I was in a crowded train car, the metallic scent of bodies pressed too close mingling with the stale coffee from a commuter's mug. Outside, the city blurred into a wash of gray and sodium orange, just another Tuesday. But the static was a lie nobody else could feel. My knuckles went white around the cold metal pole. Don't panic. Panic just makes the door swing wider. I focused on the details, the mundane anchors to the waking world, the worn pattern on the stranger's coat sleeve, the exact pitch of a child's whine 3 seats down, the rhythmic thump-thump of the train over the rails. But the static intensified, a rising hum behind my eyes, and the colors began to bleed at the edges of my vision. Then came the scent of rain on hot asphalt, impossible in the sealed, recirculated air of the car. The cityscape beyond the grimy window dissolved. The buildings sagged and melted like wax, reforming into crooked, leafless trees that clawed at a bruised violet sky. The train's rhythmic clatter softened, replaced by the wet, sucking sound of footsteps in mud. I was no longer on the train. I was standing in the dream. It was always a place like this, a bog, a forest at twilight, a derelict amusement park. Landscapes of decay. This one belonged to the man in the gray suit who'd been standing by the doors, now gone from the waking world but present here, his form shimmering and unstable. He was dreaming of loss. I could feel it emanating from him, a cold, hollow ache. The wet earth sucked at my shoes as I moved, but I made no sound. He hadn't seen me yet. The dreamer rarely does. I am a ghost in their own head. But they weren't alone. The gray men were here. They had no faces, only smooth, polished expanses of skin where features should be. They moved with an impossible economy, their long limbs unfolding like the blades of a jackknife. 3 of them, fanning out, cutting through the reeds. They weren't part of this dream. They were intruders, just like me, but they weren't here to observe. They were here to poach. I knew their purpose. They wanted the source code, the architect's key. They wanted me. They called my ability a cognitive incursion vector. I called it a curse. One of the gray men tilted its headless shape, a gesture of listening. It had sensed my presence. I couldn't let them harvest the dreamer's subconscious, not while I was in it. That was the one rule I'd made for myself. I might be a trespasser, but I wasn't a vandal. I reached out, not with my hands, but with my will, and tugged at a loose thread of the dream's fabric. The mud the gray man stood in turned to thick, viscous honey. Its legs sank to the knee. It didn't struggle, didn't react with any emotion I could comprehend. It simply began a slow, methodical process of extraction. The other 2 changed direction, gliding toward me. There was no malice in their approach, only a chilling, inexorable purpose. They moved like thought. I didn't run. Running is useless in a dreamscape. The ground always stretches and contracts to keep you in place. Instead, I pushed. I shoved against the physics of this place, forcing a rupture. The sky, already a deep purple, split open. Light, raw and blinding, poured through. Not the warm light of sun, but the sterile white light of an operating theater. It was my emergency exit, a raw, uncontrolled tear back to my own mind. But it was messy. It left a scar. I threw myself into the light, and the world dissolved into a cacophony of sensation. The feeling of falling, the taste of blood, the sound of my own gasp. I was back on the train. It was lurching to a stop at my station. The man in the gray suit was still standing by the doors, but now he was frowning, rubbing the back of his neck. A phantom ache, a psychic splinter from the violent exit I had carved through his dream. He would carry it with him all day, a vague, nameless sorrow. The doors hissed open. I stumbled out onto the platform, my legs trembling, my shirt damp with sweat. The air was cold, real, and filled with the grit of the city. I leaned against a concrete pillar, gulping it down, the static finally receding to a low thrum at the base of my skull. I had escaped, for now, but they had marked me again. Every time I entered a dream, I left a trace, a scent for them to follow. And every encounter made me stronger, sharper. They weren't just hunting me, they were training me. My reflection wavered on the dark screen of his station monitor. A tired face, pale eyes, a scar I couldn't see but could always feel. A fissure running through my own soul. I was running out of safe dreams. Soon I would have to face them not in the borrowed landscapes of strangers, but in the treacherous, uncharted territory of my own subconscious. And I was terrified of what I would find there. The diner was a sanctuary of grease and burnt coffee, a pocket of reality so stubbornly mundane it felt like a shield. I nursed a lukewarm cup in a scarred vinyl booth, the steam fogging a small circle on the window overlooking the rain-slicked street. The bell over the door chimed a cheerful, intrusive sound. I didn't look up. A person alone in a diner looks at their coffee, at the window, at the crumpled napkin. They don't make eye contact. I had made an art form of being unremarkable. Someone slid into the booth opposite me. I felt the shift in the air, the subtle displacement of space. A woman, the scent of wet wool and something else, something sharp and clean like wintergreen. They're getting closer, aren't they? Her voice was low, calm. I knew it. I lifted my head. It was Jessica, or rather, the dream Jessica. I saw her sometimes in the liminal spaces, in the fractured moments between one dream and the next, a ghost of my own making. They're always getting closer, I murmured, my gaze drifting back to the streetlights bleeding across the wet asphalt. They won't find you here, she said, though the here was ambiguous. The diner? My own mind? This place has rules. Everything has rules, I countered. The trick is learning how to break them. I was thinking of the gray men, of how they disregarded the delicate ecosystem of the subconscious, how they tore and ripped. No, the trick is learning which rules were meant to protect you. She placed her hands on the table, palms down. They were transparent. I could see the formica pattern through them. You're afraid to go back inside. To your own. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. She wasn't asking. She was stating a fact, plucking it from the air between us. My subconscious was a minefield. I knew it. That's why I stayed out, why I preferred the messy, fleeting dramas of strangers. My own mind had architecture I didn't recognize, runes that were sealed for a reason. If they find me there, it's over, I said. If they find you out here, she countered, her gaze steady. It's over now. The bell chimed again. This time, I did look up. 2 men in dark coats stepped inside, shaking the rain from their collars. Not gray men. These were flesh and blood. Hard-eyed and purposeful, their gazes sweeping the room. They weren't looking for a guy having a late-night coffee. They were looking for me. The world tilted. The clatter of cutlery, the sizzle from the grill, the low murmur of conversation, it all warped, stretching thin. The 2 men by the door began to elongate, their features blurring, smearing into that familiar, faceless gray. They were using the real world as a gateway. Jessica's form flickered. You have to run, she whispered, her form dissolving like smoke. Not here, in there. She meant my own head. The one place I refused to go. The gray men were gliding between the tables now. The other patrons, the waitress, the cook behind the counter. They were frozen, mannequins in a diorama, unaware. I was the only living thing in this pocket of reality, and the predators had my scent. My heart hammered against my ribs. Run! Where? There was nowhere to go. except in. I closed my eyes. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I didn't reach for a stranger's dream, didn't look for a crack in the world to slip through. I turned inward. I dove into the static, the hum behind my own eyes, and pulled. The fall was immediate and absolute. I landed on my hands and knees on a floor of black glass. It reflected a starless sky, a perfect empty void. I was in a corridor. The walls were also black glass, stretching into an impossible distance. This was the entrance hall. The place I built as a child, a sterile, empty fortress to keep the world out. I thought I'd buried it so deep it was gone forever. A sound echoed behind me. The soft, wet footsteps of the gray men, already here. They had followed me in. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The corridor offered no cover, no hiding places. My own panicked breaths were the only sounds, and their relentless rhythmic steps behind me. The glass walls began to change. Vague shapes moved behind the reflective surface, like fish in a deep, dark tank. Memories. My memories. A flash of sunlight on a playground swing. The smell of chalk dust in a classroom. A flash of anger, red and hot. A slammed door. They flickered past too fast to hold. I was running through the raw footage of my own life, and it was offering no shelter. The corridor opened into a vast circular library. The shelves were not made of wood, but of a pale, bone-like substance that curved up into the darkness. They were filled not with books, but with glass jars, each containing a single shimmering mode of light, a feeling, a moment, a life. In the center of the room stood a single tree. Its branches were bare, twisted, and black, and from one of the thickest branches a rope swing hung, motionless. I knew this place. I hadn't thought of it in 20 years. That's when the second set of footsteps started. They weren't the wet, sucking sounds of the gray men. They were lighter, quicker, the sound of small, bare feet on the glass floor. I spun around. A child was standing at the edge of the library's entrance. A boy, no older than 8, with my own dark, wide eyes. He was watching me. The gray men emerged from the corridor behind him, their featureless heads swiveling from the boy to me. They hesitated. For the first time, they seemed uncertain. The boy took a step toward me. He held something in his hand, a small wooden bird, its paint chipped. My bird. You're not supposed to be here, he said. His voice was my own, but high and thin. I had to come, I stammered. They were coming. They always come, he said, a strange, ancient weariness in his tone. You brought them. He pointed a small finger not at the gray men, but at the rope swing. You left the door open. I looked at the swing. It was swaying gently, though there was no breeze. And I understood. This was the memory I had sealed away, the reason the library existed, the source of my power and my fear. The day on the swing, the fall, the silence that followed, the beginning of the static. I had built the fortress to keep this one room hidden, and in my panic, I had forgotten to lock the door. One of the gray glided forward, its smooth hand raised. It wasn't reaching for me. It was reaching for the boy. No, I shouted. The word was a raw, torn thing. I didn't think. I acted. I reached for the memory shelves, not to look, but to break. I swept my arm across a row of jars. They shattered on the glass floor, not with a crash, but with a chorus of sounds. A woman's laugh, the sharp intake of a breath, the soft whisper of, I love you. 100 tiny, potent moments released at once, a storm of pure emotion. The gray men recoiled. See, their forms flickering violently in the chaotic onslaught of feeling. They were creatures of sterile intent, and this was a world of messy human reality. They couldn't process it. The boy, however, stood untouched in the eye of the storm. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. He held up the wooden bird. You have to choose, he said, his voice cutting through the din. Close the door, or learn to live in the dark. The gray men were recovering, stabilizing their forms against the tide of memories. I was out of time. I looked from the boy to the swing, the symbol of everything I had lost, to the featureless hunters who wanted to turn my curse into a weapon. Closing the door meant rebuilding the walls, strengthening the fortress, running forever. But what did living in the dark mean? I walked toward the tree. The glass crunched under my feet like frozen tears. I reached out and touched the rough rope. The memory flooded me, not as a picture, but as a sensation. The dizzying height, the feeling of weightlessness, the sudden sickening lurch, and then the impact. But there was something else, too. Something I had buried so deep it had no name. A presence, not me, not the boy, a third party, watching from the shadows, cold, observant, the architect of the fall. And I knew with a certainty that froze the blood in my veins that the gray men weren't the only ones hunting me. They weren't the hunters. They were the hounds. And the true master was already inside the house. The realization was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. I stumbled back from the swing, my gaze darting into the deep shadows between the bone shelves. The gray men were advancing again. But they were no longer the primary threat. They were a distraction, a blunt instrument. The real danger was the silence in the room, the heavy, watchful quality of the air. The boy with my face took a step toward me, holding out the wooden bird. "You see now," he whispered. "You weren't the only one who came in that day." The presence stirred. It wasn't a memory. It was a parasite, a squatter in the deepest vaults of my mind. It had been there since the beginning, feeding on my fear, shaping my ability, refining it into something it could use. The gray men were its external muscle, trying to capture the whole prize. But this was the core, the seed. "It is almost complete," a voice echoed not in my ears but directly in the cognitive space between thoughts. It was genderless, ancient, and utterly devoid of warmth. "The vessel is ripe." I was the vessel. The gray men stopped their advance, their featureless heads turning toward the darkest corner of the library. They were waiting, taking orders. My sanctuary, my fortress, my own mind, was unoccupied territory. "Close the door," the boy urged again, his eyes wide with a fear I now understood was not for himself, but for me. "It's the only way to starve it," but closing the door now would be an act of self-imprisonment. I would be locking myself in with the monster. I looked at the shimmering jars on the shelves, the countless fragments of a life I had lived. To starve it, I would have to shut them all away. To become as blank and empty as the gray men. Survival, maybe, but at the cost of my soul. "No," I said, the word a defiant spark in the encroaching darkness. I turned my back on the swing, on the boy, on the memory of the fall. I faced the corner where the presence coiled. "You want me? You have to ask for my permission." A low, resonant chuckle filled the library, a sound like grinding stones. "Permission is a construct of the weak. We take what is required." The darkness in the corner began to deepen, to solidify. It was no longer an absence of light, but a thing in itself, a tear in the fabric of this place that revealed a nothingness beyond. From it, a shape began to emerge. It was not a gray man. It was worse. It was made of the same substance as the void, a shifting, liquid shadow that absorbed the faint light of the memory jars. It had the rough outline of a man, but its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long, its head a smooth, tapering cone. It wore the shadow like a cloak, and from its depths, 2 points of cold violet light ignited. "Eyes." The boy gasped and took a step back, clutching the wooden bird to his chest. This was the thing he had been hiding from. This was the true source of the static. It glided forward, silent and effortless. The gray men parted to let it pass, its servants. It stopped a few feet from me. The air grew cold, heavy. "You have a choice, vessel," it communicated, its violet eyes fixing on me. "You can be the cage, a hollow, silent thing that exists only to contain us. Or you can be the key, the conduit through which we reshape the slumbering world." It wasn't just offering me a choice, it was revealing its end game. It wasn't enough to use me, it wanted to become me, to wear my consciousness like a suit and walk out into the collective dreamscape of humanity. The cage or the key, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. What if I choose to be neither? The shadow being tilted its conical head. There is no neither. You are broken on that swing. You were opened. We are simply what seeped into the cracks. I thought of the static, the prickling sensation that heralded every fall. I had always thought it was a side effect, the strain of crossing over, but it wasn't. It was the parasite, flexing its muscles. It had been guiding me all along, pushing me into strangers' dreams, testing the limits, learning. Each encounter with the gray men hadn't just been them hunting me. It had been the parasite observing them, learning their methods, preparing for this moment. My gaze fell back on the boy. He was shaking, but he was watching me, waiting. He was my innocence, my trauma, the heart of my power. He was the part of me that knew how to build the library, how to create a sanctuary for memory. He was the architect, and I was the demolitions expert. You said I left the door open, I said to him, my voice growing stronger. That was a mistake, but mistakes can be fixed. I didn't look at the shelves. I didn't need to. I reached inside to that core of will I used to tear my way in and out of dreams, but instead of pushing out, I pushed down, deep, past the library, past the corridor of black glass, past the sterile fortress. I went for the foundation. What are you doing? The parasite demanded, its form flickering with agitation. The gray men began to advance. You want to reshape the slumbering world? I snarled, sweat beading on my brow. Then let's give it some new raw material. I found it. A single, sealed memory I had buried deeper than any other. Not a memory of events, but a memory of pure sensation. The feeling of my mother's hand holding mine when I had a fever. Her cool palm a promise of safety against the burning heat. It was the anchor of my entire being, the one thing I had never let the parasite touch. And I shattered it. The library didn't just fill with emotion, it exploded. The love, the security, the unconditional devotion of that single moment ripped outwards in a tidal wave of light. It was not the sterile operating theater light of my escape, but a warm golden radiance, the light of a waking dawn. The gray men dissolved like smoke in a gale, their forms unraveling without a sound. The shadow being shrieked, a psychic blast of pure agony that made my teeth ache. The light was poison to it. Its cloak of darkness boiled away, revealing a seething, chaotic core of nothingness underneath. It writhed, trying to retreat back into its corner, but the golden light filled every crack, every shadow. The boy was gone. In his place stood the wooden bird, floating in the air, glowing with the same warm light. The key, not for the parasite, but for me. The floor of black glass cracked. The bone shelves crumbled into dust. The entire architecture of my subconscious was collapsing, undone by the very thing it was built to contain. I was falling again, but this time it wasn't into a dream. It was into myself. I landed in a field of tall, dry grass under a brilliant blue sky. The sun was warm on my face. There was no static. There was no hum. There was only the sound of the wind in the grass and the solid, unshakable feeling of my own 2 feet on the ground. I was whole. For the first time, I was whole. But the war wasn't over. I could still feel a tiny pinprick of cold deep inside. A seed of the void, the parasite, reduced but not destroyed. It was dormant, trapped, weakened beyond measure, but it was there. And outside, in the waking world, the shadowy organization that had sent its hounds after me was still waiting. I had refused to be the cage or the key. I had chosen to be the locksmith. I had changed the locks on my own soul. I opened my eyes. I was still sitting in the diner booth. The bell over the door chimed again, and a tired-looking truck driver walked in, taking a seat at the counter. The 2 men in dark coats were gone. The steam from my coffee cup was gone too. The coffee was cold. My reflection in the window was clear. No more scars. I picked up my cup and downed the cold, bitter dregs in one gulp. Then I stood up, left a few bills on the table, and walked out into the rain. I didn't look back. I was no longer running. I was no longer the hunted. I was something new. I was a dreamer who had woken up. And now, it was my turn to do the hunting. The world of sleep was vast, and it had a new guardian. The static was gone, but I could still feel the hum of a billion sleeping minds, a quiet symphony waiting for its conductor. And I was just beginning to learn how to lead. That was how to build a better nightmare. Thank you so much for listening and spending this time here with me. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more stories like this find the people who love them. There's more coming. More strange doors. More haunted places. More stories about the things that wait just past waking, so stay tuned. And until next time, thanks for being here.